friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears. Welcome to the MC Lars podcast. This is episode 57. This week is with artist Chason Matthams. It is Monday, September 30th. Happy Rosh Hashanah. It's the Jewish New Year. Holler. Chason Matthams is a G. And I've known this dude for 20 years. We went to the same middle school together and the same high school together. He was in my sister's class. He was a year older. And he ended up working on Jeff and Some Aliens, which was Sean Donnelly's show on Comedy Central. And Sean was on a few episodes ago. But Chason is a fine artist. And not only is he a good artist, he's a fine artist. He's a painter. He talks about how he does post-internet art. He does these really cool detailed renderings. And his stuff is just very technical and kind of funny and surprising and weird and beautiful. And I love this episode because I've never had like a painter on the podcast. I've had rappers, writers, my parents, you know what I'm saying? But never like an artist, like a painter. And one of the cool things he said is how artists who are like visual artists only need to have a few people love their art, buy it for their collections, and then they're famous. They paint for a smaller audience. Whereas doing media, streaming media, audio media, music, movies, you have to try to cast the net for a big audience. And so it was very interesting hearing Chason's approach, his business. He got his undergrad at NYU in fine art, and then he did his MFA. And now he teaches there, but really part-time. He mainly spends time in his studio in Manhattan, painting these crazy canvases. And one of them that I really loved is the Marge Simpson, like the surreal 3D Marge Simpson. He did a residency up in Maine and painted this giant canvas, but stuff is cool. So ChasonMatthams.com, that's ChasonMatthams.com, or just look at the name on the podcast. He's on Instagram. He's got a website. He's killing it. So this is a very cool episode. Oh, and one other thing we talked about is how I've interviewed a lot of people from my high school. Sean Donnelly, Chris Gates, Mr. Salerno, Sam Salerno, a teacher. Now Chason. It's just, they're my friends and stuff, but it's like a creative cadre of fools who went into the arts and the humanities and somehow figured out how to make it work. This week's episode is brought to you by the Patreon Larsians. As always, shout out to the new ones, the ones who signed up on the Aquabats tour. They came and saw me and signed up. Chris Shirley, Morgan Miller, and Spencer Wood. Awesome homies. Thank you very much. Morgan is a photographer who takes great pictures. Great guy. And shout out to the old ones, Alex Anderson, Lewis Simpson-Jones, and Anthony Perkis. Thank you all for keeping the Patreon going. It's never too late to sign up for the Patreon and get all that flavor. This month, September, I had a song about Aleister Crowley and then another song about a llama. It was an outtake from Zombie Dinosaur that I redid where I rap in Spanish for a large part of it. So if you want to hear MC Lars rapping in Espanol, necesitas support the Patreon. And that's what's up. So let's jump into this podcast. Before we do, yes, I'm going on tour again, my friends, on the West Coast this time with Oakley Dokley. They dress like Ned Flanders and sing about Ned Flanders. I think that's freaking cool. It's a short tour. It's a short West Coast tour. October 4th, San Diego. October 5th, Costa Mesa, which is Orange County. October 6th, my birthday. I'm playing the Bay Area. It's freaking cool. Then I do a show by myself up in Arcata, which is in the Humboldt County. It's near Humboldt State University, and it's with a group called the Jack Moves. So check that out. I've never played up there, but I've been up there a lot, and I love that part of the state. Then I go to Bellingham, Washington, October 8th, Portland, Oregon on the 9th, Seattle on the 10th, Denver on the 13th, and that is it for the tour so far, booked for the year. Just working on stuff, and that's what's up. So let's get into it. This is my interview with Chason Matthams on the MC Lars podcast. Chill. Ladies and gentlemen, from Pacific Grove, California, now living in New York City, I'm here with Chason Matthams. Hey, Chason.
Hey, how's it going?
How long have we known each other?
I was trying to figure that out. I think you said 25 years, maybe, if it was middle school that we started, because I started Stevenson Middle when I was in 5th grade.
And you were in you were in 5th grade. You were in my sister's class.
Yeah, I was in your sister's class, Sarah's class. and you were the grade below me, I believe, right?
Yeah. So I always looked up to your class.
Were you there in fourth grade?
No, I went to Santa Catalina for that year.
Oh, okay.
Because it's kind of a long story. We used to live in Oakland, and my dad got a new job. So we moved down, and she liked Stevenson, and I liked Catalina, but then I switched.
Oh, that's funny.
So, where did you go to lower school?
First I went to Robert. I went to Robert Down in Pacific Grove, the public school, because we lived on 14th Street, right below it.
Yeah.
And then I think someone convinced my mom that in order to get into the high school, which is a boarding school and more exclusive, that it would be good if I went to the middle school. Which, now that I look back on it, was kind of like, oh, he's probably too dumb to qualify for the high school. So we got to get him in there early, so they'll just allow him.
So that's interesting. Don't you have a brother?
I do. I have a younger brother, Keen.
He's younger than me?
Yeah, he was in the class below you.
Wow.
Yeah, and he started up at the same time as me, so yes.
We were talking at the beginning of this interview that I've had many either former alumni from Stevenson and even a teacher, Mr. Salerno, on the podcast.
Yes, yeah. And it's been wonderful to listen to all of them, too.
And we mentioned you on the one with Sean. We were talking about Jeff and Some Aliens.
Yeah. Sean, who created Jeff and Some Aliens, and part of the reason I probably moved to New York as well, too. He went to NYU and was in the film program, and I wanted to transfer in. And at some point, he had told me that he had seen in Washington Square Park both a Backstreet Boy and who was it? One of the guys, some rapper or something like that. And I was like, oh, that's all I need. Like, I should be in New York if you see Backstreet Boys.
MCA from the Beastie Boys?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. That's who he saw. And I was like, sold. Okay, I'm going to come to New York after this. So I was at San Francisco State University and then came out here for that. But,
wow. So you transferred sophomore year?
Yeah, sophomore year. But then have been doing things for Sean for a long time, mostly animation stuff as well.
Man, there's a lot to unpack with that. Because it's interesting that there's a lot of transplants from the Bay Area that do come to New York. Mm-hmm. And I think as the Bay has become more like stultifying and Silicon Valley-ized, people are leaving, Yeah. And then there's people like you who had left and stayed on the East Coast.
Yeah. I mean, I get to go home quite often. I'm lucky, and I get to see my family there, and even get to go to San Francisco quite a bit. But yeah, it feels like even from when we were little and probably visiting San Francisco, or when you, I guess, lived in Oakland, like it has changed dramatically up there, and definitely does not feel as creative as a place anymore.
You have an amazing studio here in Manhattan.
Yes.
You gave me the tour, and we're doing the interview in your studio that you share with some other artists.
Yes, yeah.
And I didn't realize that the Wall Street area had like special spaces like this. Do you want to talk a little about the history of this room?
Yeah, it's above this bar called Killarney Rose. It's been here since 1969, and I believe that at one point it's a 4-story building in the middle of all these high rises. So it's a kind of weird situation in the first place. But at one point on the top floors, they had like one of the first computer companies in the 70s, and it went out of business, I think. And next door, there's this woman who was doing props for U2, and the guy who owned it was like, well, the artist person is like paying the rent, and they haven't gone out of business, so we'll get some more artists in here. So I feel like now the guys that own it, kind of as an homage to their great grandfather, kind of keep us around, maybe.
Cool.
I don't know, but it's been wonderful to have this space, though. Yeah,
and it's a close commute for you.
Yeah, I'm up in the Lower East Side, so teach at NYU as well. So I'm kind of just been in the East Village downtown area for almost, the entire time that I've been in New York, all 19 years now.
Dude, that's crazy. And it's crazy to think you were here when 9/11 happened, right?
Yeah.
You just moved.
Yes, I'd been here only for about a month and a half or something like that, I believe.
Wow.
Yeah, so that was the intro to New York at that point. Yeah.
Oh my God, man.
And I guess the way that I registered that was through like just the new energy of being in New York as well too. But I don't know if you remember, my mom was a flight attendant for United Airlines for a long time. So that morning was a little bit scary, just because I knew my mom was getting on a flight then, and before I figured out that what the flights were and everything. I just knew that one of those planes was a United plane. So, and cell phones weren't working. So it was a little scary for a while on a personal level, but she was fine. And, but it was pretty wild, the whole situation.
I mean, to be away from home. And Sean talks about how he didn't he film it or something?
He filmed a lot of it. Yeah. He was right down here on Water Street in one of the dorms, which is from the studio really only 2 blocks away or something like that. So he was very, very close to it. Wow. I was up on 12th Street, so I was a little bit further away. But yeah, I think that was Sean and I's, both of our instinct was to grab our cameras and just kind of go out onto the streets and see what was going on.
So you have footage of it too?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Has anyone seen it?
I think my brother watched it one time, to tell you the truth.
Yeah.
But I've gone back to it maybe a couple times, and it's just a bunch of people arguing in the parks basically, and lights flashing and all the posters going up. So it's mostly just a jumble of energy and kind of, I don't know. Yeah. It's heavy. It's heavy and sad. Yeah.
Not something you want to go back and watch.
No, not all the time. But I mean, I feel guilty at that point but when I think back to it, because I only registered it as energy then. I was just like, I guess this is New York. I mean, I guess this is just a thing that happens here. It didn't really, like, the tragedy of it seeped in over a longer period of time, I think. And I actually just went down to the 9/11 museum for the first time.
Oh, yeah.
And that's just like, I mean, it felt weird putting all of that into this like museum designy sort of, it just felt like pornography in some way. It felt really weird.
In the gift shop, right?
Yeah, and there's like a gift shop, and everything's just organized too neatly, and they have all the posters from that time. But I don't know. Maybe it's a good thing. I don't know what's right or wrong. It just felt weird for me.
You know what really affected me? The only time I needed a Kleenex, I mean, it was sad, was the room where they play the messages that people left their spouses and stuff.
Oh, yeah.
That's heavy.
Yeah.
You hear, I love you, and, I'm thinking of you. I'm not hurting.
Yeah.
It's heavy.
Yeah. I don't think I could spend much time with that, to tell you the truth.
Yeah. I was glad to leave. And there was a woman, I went with my parents, and there was a British woman in front of us in line, and it was like her 3rd time going.
Wow.
And I was like, is this a destination for international people? I was like, what? I wouldn't want to go back.
Yeah, it seems to be that way. I mean, it felt like going through like the Holocaust Museum or something when we were younger, where then that was just very informative and you felt like you were learning a lot of history, but it just made me think about like, what about the people that were there then who, if they're going through the Holocaust Museum now, I mean, that's gotta, I don't know. And of course, those analogies aren't the same at all. But it's not the way that I process that sort of thing. But I could see that it could be a helpful way for other people to process it, to go to a museum like that. But for me, it just felt really weird.
And it's the last thing we could say about it, unless you want to talk more about it. But I thought it was interesting how they pointed the finger at Bush and his crew for having incorrectly attributed the disaster, the aftermath element. That was like you know what I mean? The history there.
Yeah.
That was interesting.
Huh. Oh, and yeah. I mean, I guess I didn't spend much time with that either. What's being revealed here basically is that I went in and closed my eyes and just walked through as fast as I could.
Right.
Oh, that's terrible of me.
Well, one of the things, okay, so I'm going to post a link to some of your art when we post this. One of the things that you don't close your eyes for is your very intricate, technical, inspired pieces. And we're surrounded by your giant canvases. And it always surprised me and made me impressed that, like, you really found your path. You stuck to it. You went to grad school for it. You made a business around it. And you believe in the power of the canvas. And I've never had an artist on the podcast who's an artist, and you're also a teacher, but who that's their path, painting. Everyone's gone digital, and let's talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a weird thing, and the art world occupies like this weird area within all the realms of creativity as well too. I talk about it a lot with Sean, actually, just because he's in television, and it probably is relatable to you as well in music, that for you guys, there's this audience that kind of needs to be there, and you can find that audience in a bunch of different ways, and there's different platforms for that, and they're collapsing and changing with the internet and all that kind of stuff. But in the art world, it's different. Like, you don't need this giant audience. You really it doesn't need to be that popular, and you need a couple of collectors maybe to buy your work in order to support you having a career in it, or maybe some smart people that are into it that elevate it in an academic way. But you don't need it to be this popular thing. So it's a little bit different than your guys' world, I think. But it is a rarefied world to be in, that's for sure.
And would you say New York is, I mean, I probably know the answer to this, but New York is like a center of the visual art world?
Yes.
And is that maybe a reason why you wanted to stay?
Yes, that's part of it. I think that if I want to do this for a career, you kind of need to have a base in New York in one way or another. I mean, it can, of course, happen all sorts of different ways with the internet now. But for the most part, like, you can be in LA or Berlin or London or some, of the other
San Francisco or not?
There's some artists based in San Francisco that have careers for sure.
Yeah.
But in terms of the most opportunities, I think being in New York presents more opportunities for artists, I would say.
So, okay, so we're jumping around a lot, but did getting your MFA, so you got your MFA at NYU?
I did, yes.
How do you think that helped?
Well, it did and it didn't help. It was a great experience for me because, I mean, making art is a pretty isolated thing as well, especially not all artists, but for painters, I'm by myself a lot, so I'm not collaborating with people. So going to grad school all of a sudden puts you in a community of people, and then there's a community of ideas, and you have people to bounce your ideas off of, and teachers coming in there. So that was like a wonderful thing to all of a sudden have this community around you. And ideally, you're making maybe some connections there as well too. But there are a lot of criticisms with the MFA world at this point, just because it's so expensive, and there's so many people going into those programs, and there's so many different programs that it's not sustainable. I think that the stats are that to be a fine artist, you have a better chance making a career as an actor than you do as a fine artist statistically. So it's a very, very difficult thing to do.
Props to you then, man.
Yeah. So people have, to answer your question, people have problems with grad school because it costs so much money and it doesn't really present a lot of opportunities. But as you know, artists, the stats don't really show what artists are doing out there in the world because they're creative people. So they might not end up as artists making a living off their artwork, but they will end up in other creative fields using their creativity, using some of the tools that they learned throughout their grad programs or whatever as well too. So yeah.
Yeah, I like this idea that it's a special, was it 2 years or 3?
2 years, yeah.
Where you really could hone in on your technical craft, right? Yes,
yeah. And just allowing yourself the time as well too, because as anyone knows who even if you don't have like a full-time job, even just having the discipline to make yourself do it all the time is a difficult thing.
Totally.
So being in a place where you're forced and under pressure and allowing yourself that time, is really, really helpful, I think.
How many hours a week do you teach now?
I only teach one class, so cool. I'm only teaching on Mondays, and that class is almost 4 hours or something like that. So not that often.
That's nice, huh?
Yeah, that's perfect. It's enough where I have to communicate with people once a week, so I have to hold it together a little bit and be presentable at least every once in a while. So yeah, it allows me to be in here a good amount of the time as well too. But then I also do freelance jobs here and there as well, so I have to do that. And
having an MFA makes it so you're able to teach, right? Because you have the credentials.
Yes. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so let me ask you a question. Do you ever feel like working with younger people, you get like new ideas, like when you're up there, or not really?
Yes, totally.
That's cool.
Yeah. I mean, it's two things. It feels good because I only really know how to do one thing good in this world, which is make a painting, and I'm pretty And the only thing that I have any confidence with is like, if you're a beginner painter, I probably have some directions I can point you towards that will be helpful. I don't really know how to do anything else. So that feels very good on a selfish level to be like, oh, this is the one thing I know how to do, and I'm helping these people.
Right.
But then you end up just learning so much from them too. I mean, everyone's background, and I'm teaching non-art majors. So some of them are getting their doctorates. Some of them are going into finance. It's just kind of all over the place. So their different approaches on how to make a painting are so informative. So I learn a lot from them. Have you had that experience in the classroom? Because I think you've been in the classroom a couple times, right?
Yeah, I do music workshops with kids.
Yeah.
And they turn me on to like new stuff, new rappers, new memes, all this stuff.
Right.
But it's interesting because like then a month will go past and all that stuff is ancient.
Yeah.
So it's like to have the routine. I don't do it regularly. So I imagine being regularly in the classroom, you're constantly refreshed.
Yes.
Theoretically.
Yeah. And I, what's funny is when you say that, I give them, just to get a sense of who they are, I give them a little questionnaire the first class.
Oh, cool.
To ask what their favorite TV show, what their favorite movie is, who their favorite artist is, musician, and all that kind of stuff. And yes, it changes so quickly who they like. And then more and more, now I've added what's your favorite app on there as well too. Because at some point, people just started, you'd be like, what's your favorite movie? And they're like, movie? What? Like, who sees movies anymore? Or
Who
like,
has time for that?
A television show. Like, it's all about these other things. So, yeah, it keeps you updated a little bit as well, being around them.
I can tell you're a cool teacher.
Yeah, so cool.
So you worked on, Sean and I talked about this. You worked on a lot of the art for Jeff and some Aliens. And you were living in Portland for a year. Is that what you said?
Yeah. I moved out to Portland for a year. So that was the only year that I was away from New York. And they had the production out there in this big old warehouse that we were in. And I was the lead background designer is what they call it on there, which means basically everything that's not moving behind the characters is what we were in charge of. Bless Sean for putting me in that position, because I have absolutely no training or reason to be there, but it seemed to have worked out.
And so you kind of had to, your style is more realistic. So you kind of, Sean directed you on the style. And
I think it was like Sean's style is very loose and kind of messy, and he likes things kind of a little wiggly in that way. But for the show, it got cleaned up a little bit. So it was kind of this combination of it got a little bit neater, I think, under me being there, and then just all these other professionals taking over what were Sean's creations. So it was kind of wild to see them morph into like a real Comedy Central television show. Yeah. So what was the total crew on the program? I think it ranged from about 40 to 50 people.
Wow.
Yeah. So it was like a big old warehouse with all of us in there, and then the administrator people and all these bosses, I don't know their names and everything. So
you had people working under you.
Yeah. And then I had like a team under me as well, which was ridiculous because I would often be asking them very fundamental questions about animation and how to do backgrounds, and trying to pretend that I was the boss at the same time. But it's good because, I mean, Sean and I have known each other for so long, and I'm sure you have these creative relationships as well, where he doesn't need to communicate with me in as extensive a way as he would with someone else, because our frame of reference is so similar, because we've been in that art room since high school with each other.
Right.
Sean can be like, okay, we have a new character. She's the kind of girl that is like kind of gothy, but probably goes to punk shows and lives in Santa Cruz. And I'm like, got it. I know exactly what her bedroom looks like and what we're going for here. And like the conversation doesn't need to be that long. So
that's cool.
Yeah, I think it made things easier for him in some ways, or at least I hope it did.
And he trusted that you knew you have the same frame of reference.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
And speaking of that, like some of the backgrounds, like you had the scene where they got married was like Big Sur.
Yeah. It was definitely Big Sur inspired. That's funny you recognize that.
I was like, I knew that. And what, were there any other places specifically inspired by the Central Coast?
I think probably like a lot of the nature stuff. I mean, and we kind of didn't, they didn't give him an exact town where Jeff from Jeff and Some Aliens lived, but our reference point were these California places. So it was like, oh, he's this episode with his girlfriend, he's going to propose to her and they'll probably drive up to like the mountains. So it's kind of like a Lake Tahoe-y sort of situation.
Right.
Or they'll drive, you know, down like the coast to like LA or Santa Monica or something like that. So those were our reference points a lot of the time. Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah.
We're looking at one of your canvases here, which is, you said it's the view from your parents' house?
Yes, yeah. They were up on Jack's Peak for a while in Monterey, looking down at like the pines and the way the fog would roll in there in Pacific Grove in Monterey.
And I instantly recognized, like, oh, I know that light. I know that area.
Yeah.
It's cool.
I mean, it's funny. That's kind of like driving to school every morning before the fog is burned off. That was what was going on in Pebble Beach.
It has kind of a mystical, ethereal quality that when you leave the Central Coast, you don't realize that the water and land doesn't always coexist like that.
No.
It's a special little area. And I wonder, how did it feel painting this? Did you feel nostalgic? Did you feel introverted? Or what were some of your feelings?
You know, I probably picked it because I wanted to just spend some time looking at nature, which quite often happens for me being here in the city. I do this stupid thing as well. I think I've done it for almost 8 years now, where I put a picture of nature on Facebook every single day for, I think it's been 8 years or something like that. And recently I was validated because I saw this study that showed that even if you just look at a picture of nature every day, it gives you a sense of calm and usually indicates that you're a happier person. So I think that maybe that was one of the reasons that I was just like, okay, like I've been in New York for probably too many months if I've decided to make this nature painting, because I just need to be in this quiet space for a while.
So you painted it here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you have this cool juxtaposition where you have like a grid behind it. Mm-hmm. What's the story behind that? Yeah.
So the grid kind of shows up in a lot of my paintings, and it's an indication to two things. And one, the process of making them, that for a long time, I mean, you know, centuries and centuries ago, people were using this grid method in order to graph things out and measure things correctly, get the perspective correctly and everything. And now, though, it kind of looks like this, like almost like 80s sort of video game graphic-y sort of thing, or when you put a grid in Photoshop or something like that. So, of course, Photoshop is built off of all these tools in the dark room and that people have been using for centuries or whatever. So for me, it has those two different things. It's kind of this nod to a way of looking at nature and the world through technology, but also a nod to like the process of making something and building something up and the history of it as well too.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
And so it's on top, but it's also behind some of it, right? Like it's behind these leaves on the left, or am I?
Yes. Yeah. And this one, it goes over the top of some of the trees and then some are on top of it. So it kind of runs throughout it in this way. So it becomes less flat that way. It becomes more dimensional, I think. So you're kind of looking through the grid to see some of those trees in the background as well, too. So it gives this feeling maybe of, looking through a viewfinder or something like that as well.
That's cool.
Yeah. But it's also this indication that things are kind of like just about to be moved around, like they exist in like a Photoshop world or something where you could drag and drop something. So in a lot of these, in the paintings that we're looking at next to them, there's these other flower paintings that also have this grid in them. And in these flower paintings, there are actually flowers that are dragged and dropped from other situations and look like they're, and I want them to feel like can always be shifted around, that even though they're painting and static, that the association that we have with them is always kind of shifting, and they can be placed, like my paintings jump around. So like right to the right of that is this Marge Simpson painting all of a sudden, and then behind that is this Da Vinci rendering. So we're jumping around in styles, and their meaning changes by the context that they're in. And I think that grid puts it in this kind of like Photoshop soundstage, like we're arranging the objects into a narrative or into a story, but we don't quite know what it is yet. So everything kind of feels in flux in a way.
So the data, we are trying to interpret and find meaning in the data.
Yes.
Would you call your art postmodern? Does that feel kind of like academic and dry?
I mean, it is, and now there's this. I think that the term that it falls under is this term called post-internet art, which I'm sure within the art world they've moved on from that term because they move on from things so fast. It was probably introduced 2 years ago or something like that. But post-internet art is this idea that, like, when you Google like a tree or something now, that in your Google image search, like a tree that Matt Groening rendered shows up, like the Da Vinci rendering shows up, the Ansel Adams picture of a tree, the National Geographic. So there's all these different trees just crammed up right next to each other, and there's no hierarchy to them either. There's no one being like, oh no, the fine painting by Da Vinci is better than the Simpsons one or whatever. That's that the hierarchy system has fallen apart. So that I fall into this category right now of all these different styles being kind of mashed together without hierarchy anymore. So I think that would be the umbrella that I'm classified under at this point.
And it's interesting when you think about the post-internet culture. It's very memeified and very quick and very much about creating lots of content constantly. And you're obviously prolific, but these paintings take longer than a Drake meme.
Yeah.
So it's like, it's a whole different, right?
Yes.
It's post-internet, but it's also timeless in your technique. And I think that's always when I try to make a song or I'm trying to work on an album, I'm trying to make something that lasts, that has a lot of depth. And I see that in your art. And I love this Marge Simpson one because I see that she's walking and there's a pile of hammers, and I think, okay, she's like continually disappointed in Homer's inability to fix things. And then you have like the stump, and you said the background was like inspired by a piece you were doing for the show with Sean, maybe?
Yeah, from Jeff and Some Aliens. Yeah, as a background from there. Yeah.
It's interesting, and it's also familiar. I don't know. And it's like, how long did that one take you, the Marge one?
That took me about a month, or I would say like 3 weeks, but that was up at a residency that I did in Maine. So I was working every day on it. So I was putting a lot of hours into that guy. But I like that your kind of narrative that you're starting to create here, or your response to it as well, because I guess that the further note to add on after this post-internet idea that my art falls under is then that my specific interest it seems to have been that I'm interested in the way that our brains connect disparate ideas to each other, and the way that now that when we go through the world that you are pushed up against, like, especially in New York, like, all these different cultures, and then what you read in the New York Times from something across the world, and then this advertisement, then you come up, and then your friend's Instagram. And naturally, our brains connect all these things because we understand the world through narrative. So our brain is like, let's force this into a narrative. And it can be so random now because we're getting information from everywhere. So I think that my interest in making all these different things is the way that our brains take all that disparate information, force them into a narrative, and then how that narrative can be two things, like one, fruitful, like you can gain knowledge from that, and some of those narratives function in the world, are valuable lessons, and then some of them though are very misleading. It's just a bunch of nonsense that's been thrown together as well too.
Right.
So then that kind of goes with this idea of all of them being in a state of process as well too, that everything's shifting around. We're continuously trying to figure out what the narrative is and what the most fruitful narrative is for us, which one we relate to the most and which one the audience relates to the most maybe as well too. But I'm sure that you can relate being in that creative space, and then the way that just ideas come together, and which idea you follow and which one you don't.
Well, and you were talking about the Google image search hierarchy, and I think the post-internet art thing that you mentioned, it's really this dismantling of the Platonic idea that there's a perfect tree. No, there are a million variations, and they're right here. And I remember when I started drawing, what the advice used to say was, cut things out, cut out pictures from magazines of like cars you like, and make a folder and have a cars and then a tree folder. And now you don't have to do that.
No.
Yeah. When did you, so were you always painting when you were a kid, or when did you find this passion?
I wasn't. I always drew, and I always had an interest in comics and cartoons and things like that. And my dad was an architect as well too, so he always was drawing and had those tools around and painted a little bit himself. But I never painted, and was terrified of doing any of it. I mean, it was that classic thing for some people where you think you're good at something, but because you think you're good at it, you're terrified to do it, because if you do it, then you would figure out that maybe you're not good at it, and that would be too much to handle. So it's funny thinking back to knowing you in middle school as well too, because one thing I really remember was all your comics over the years, and that you did comics for the newspaper as well too, right?
Yeah, you have a good memory.
Yeah. And I was like, and to tell you the truth, I was totally jealous of that, because you were much freer with your creativity back then, or at least from an outside perspective, it felt like that you just went for it and you just put it out there, and it ended up in the paper and people knew you for that and everything. So I was like, oh man, Andrew's the art guy, or Sean's the art guy.
But our renderings were quick and sloppy.
Yes.
Right? It's like you were determined to be thoughtful.
I was, but right? I think, this is turning into like a therapy session, because the more I pick this apart, the more I see my ego in all of this as well too. And I never painted for a very long time, because I think that it was that thing that I thought I was good at it, but like if I was going to do it, I better be really good at it, and I better be better than everybody else. And it scared me from painting for a very long time. So I didn't paint until college, until my junior year of college. So I was about 23 or 22 or something.
Did you
like
have
that.
a major before that, or?
I transferred to go to the film school, and then I ended up in the art department.
That's awesome.
And then eventually, and even there, I was too scared to paint, and eventually I did it. And now you could say that all this rendering that happens here, and this learning to do it this way has been this big cover up of me being like afraid in middle school to share anything that was maybe messy at that point.
Well, that's interesting, man. And also that, that some people wait till they're 40 or 50 or older to have that fear. Like they think, oh, I'm a good rapper, I'm a good songwriter, but I'm just too busy. I have to, the kids need to be driven to soccer practice. I'll do it later. People put it off in their life, and that's sad. I think it's like we talked about earlier. It's special that there's a cohort of people from our generation that went for it. Yeah, supportive teachers and families, and it's been fun tracking the people from our high school over the years as well too. I mean, I'm still friends with a bunch of people, and so many have come through New York City as well too. I just saw like Tessa Stewart last week. Oh yeah, who writes for Rolling Stones in the political section. Yeah, right. That's awesome. Yeah, and her sister Catherine, who was working on the Avatar movies in the costuming department, who did fashion for a long time. It's tight. Yeah, Alexander Wang. Yeah, the year below us. Yeah, Alexander, my brother's class. Yeah, so the year below you. Yeah, and now he's Lady Gaga's singing about him, right? Yes, yeah, he is so big at this point. Eccentric dude. He got kicked out of Stevenson twice, I believe. Right, was the situation. And I've seen him on the streets a couple times. Did you say hi or not? I did. Yeah, I have. I've said hi. Yeah. Did he recognize you or not? He did. Yes. Yeah. I guess the first. I mean, do people know on your podcast or care who Alexander Wang is? I don't know. That's a very good question. Maybe explain. Alexander Wang was the hottest fashion person for a very long time. So as he got bigger than all those other big fashion houses like Versace and Gucci and all those things. He was like the cool kid for a while, and was friends with all the celebrities and all that kind of nonsense or whatever. And everyone, he was. A lot of people would wear his clothes to the Oscars and stuff. Yes, exactly. Right. That sort of thing. And within or at least my snooty New York world and the art world and everything like that, I was like, oh, that's a good person to know. So it was weird to go to high school with him and know that he was in that position as well too, because it's like I was like, oh, if I can get that guy to buy one of my paintings, like my life changes. Like he Instagrams one of my paintings and like
I'm like good to go sort of thing.
Right. Oh
so probably when I saw Alexander Wang on the street, I approached with that sort of desperate energy, which is not a good energy to approach someone with.
So how did the conversation go? Yo, I went to high school with you.
I mean, a couple times we just kind of like, I think because he lived in the East Village for a while, we kind of like eyed each other as we walked each other by. And I was like, I think I know who that pretty boy is. And he like, kept looking back at me. And then one time I stopped him and we chatted for a little bit and brought up like Catherine went to school with him at Parsons, I think it was, and everything. And he was with his friends and they had walked on. So he's like, oh, sorry, I have to leave sort of thing.
That's cool though.
Yeah. But he's like so big. He's one of those people that's like in like a 3 Escalades, like going off to like a private jet to wherever at this point. So he's an alien person within this world.
And I remember he was always pushing the boundaries of fashion, even and gender and stuff, even as a freshman in high school.
Totally.
It's kind of tight.
Yeah. I mean, as the way my brother tells it, that and that time in high school, 98, 97 or something like that, still very homophobic, still people using slurs all the time when talking with each other. No one was out. And then all of a sudden this guy shows up who's just like wearing a bra around everywhere. And I think he liked me and my brother because my brother would like let him sit on his lap and be like a little bit flirty or whatever at the time. But I was just like, I had mad respect because he could draw like a motherfucker too. Like Miss Rumbaugh's class, like all of a sudden one day I walked in, I was like, I am not the tightest renderer in here. Like you and Sean could do the cartoon thing and be funny and everything. I was like, I'm a pretty good renderer. Showed up one day, I was the loser at that one as well too. And it was because of Alexander Wang.
And he's younger.
Yes. Yeah. And he's got bigger balls than anyone else on canvas walking around in a bra.
That's pretty great. That's pretty funny. This is an interesting anecdote for the podcast. So I wanted, speaking of delving up the past, there's a story that I didn't know if you knew I was going to bring up, but something I wanted to apologize for, which was in middle school. You and Tyler Potter both did poems that did not really reference Trent Reznor, but we're kind of in the style.
Oh, that's funny.
And I was jealous of y'all because you guys were very much like poignant lyricists. So I gave the Downward Spiral lyrics to Brenda Stockdale, the teacher, and you both got in trouble. And I shouldn't have done that. Right? Do you remember this story?
I totally remember.
And I'm sorry, Chason.
I was almost going to bring this up as well too. Good. I thought about it the other day.
Yeah.
But I forgot that Tyler had also written a poem that was probably kind of Nine Inch Nails oriented as well.
His was more like he said I'm Mr. Self-Destruct in his.
I think that was maybe me.
Okay.
Yeah. And then I forgot what Tyler's was at this. I'm still close with Tyler as well.
Because I saw both of y'all, you were going to see Star Wars a few years ago. That's the last time I saw you.
Yeah.
In Monterey.
Oh yeah. Okay. Yes, I remember this. I remember the story, but it's funny that you feel guilty about it because that I think has been a valuable lesson for me over the years. Because when I wrote that poem, that poem was so much like that first song off of the Downward Spiral, where he just kind of lists things over again.
Mr. Self-Destruct.
Yeah. And it was followed that structure like completely. And I didn't like that song at the time, so I would never listen to it. Right. So when you were like, oh, it's based on this thing, I was like, and Tyler backed me up. Tyler was like, no, I know Chason. We talk about this all the time. He doesn't like that song.
So you hadn't heard the song?
No, I had heard it, but it's true that I skipped it. So in my brain, I was like, I couldn't be plagiarizing this song. I don't even like it. I don't even listen to it.
Right.
When I look back at that, I clearly was plagiarizing that song. So you should not feel guilty about that. You were right to blow the whistle.
Well, here's what had happened was I was in this poetry competition and someone had turned in the lyrics to Rage Against the Machine's Wake Up and they won. But he or she didn't show up.
Oh my God.
Or they didn't show up for the award. So I was like, I recognize this. So they had the award taken away. So I was on this whole save the 90s alt metal.
Yeah. Nice.
Kick. But I remember, so here's how I realized that it was influential on you. We were hanging out at your apartment drawing and you showed me your essay where you referenced it, your admissions essay.
Oh, really?
Where you were like,
I don't even remember this.
Andrew Nielsen, why did you turn me in? This is art. I'm allowed to reference things, but it wasn't theft. Do you not remember this?
I do not remember this.
It was an essay that you had written about this moment.
For college.
I think for college or maybe for high school.
Oh, good Lord. So I stayed defensive about that for a while, huh?
Do you not remember this? That was when I realized that, oh man, I shouldn't have blown the whistle.
Oh, no, you definitely should have. Because the lesson part of this for me was one, just the kind of like hoops that we jump through with ourselves in order to lie to ourselves about things. Right. So like at that time, I fully, and apparently for years afterwards, was like, no way that I referenced Nine Inch Nails at all in this thing. I am telling the truth here. I am 100% certain about it. At no point in my psyche was I like, oh, I did this thing. I thought I was 100% felt like I did not do this thing. But now, years later, I'm like, clearly it influenced me in one way or another. Even if it wasn't exactly the same, I was 100% thinking about that song. And yeah, it's just been a great lesson in terms of like the gymnastics we go through in order to be defensive and protect our own egos. So constantly now in my life, I kind of do that. I'm just like with people, I'm like, interesting. They are giving me a criticism. This is a person, I don't think we were great friends or anything at that time, but I clearly knew you as a nice person. There is no, you were doing this in good faith. Let's put it that way. So like when someone, especially like a partner or a family member is coming to you, cares about you, who is giving you criticism of yourself, don't do that thing where you're like, come up with a defense of it. Like listen to what they're saying, because you will go to great lengths in order to protect yourself, or at least I do that with. It's a negative aspect of my personality that I've come to terms with over the years.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
And it's also interesting though, because in the post-internet age, fair use could be a reference to that album. It could be, referential art is, I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I think that like poetry, especially, there's an academic quality to where you can, like, if you can reference specific things. T.S. Eliot, the Wasteland is just full of references, right?
Right, yeah.
So, yeah, I don't know. I learned that you don't need to be, we both learned something. I don't learn that you don't need to be concerned about your peers' academic development, right? That's like snooty.
Well, I think that there's a right and there's a wrong way to do it. I would say, okay. and I mean, well, at least in my world. So, like, if I have no problem with writing a poem like that, or in all these paintings, like there's flowers straight from Disney, there's flowers straight from Da Vinci. As long as you are putting that reference out there, you're not winning poetry contests on somebody else's words or something like that. And especially you're not profiting off of somebody else's work where maybe they're not profiting off of it as well.
Yeah.
And I think within the art world, there's a lot of different artists that kind of deal with this appropriation stuff as well. There was this big movement of the picture generation in the 80s, and then all these appropriation artists as well too, that now their careers are almost about these like legal battles of what is safe to steal and what is not safe to steal, and where someone's idea is their idea and becomes a new idea, and where that line is. And it seems like it's a constant flux within society of what you can do and what's acceptable from your peer group as well too.
Oh, man, and people like Duchamp making it like so much about like the Mona Lisa one. It's like, if it's funny, you kind of get away with it, right? Or if it's fair use because it's so old.
Yeah.
Tell me about the picture artist stuff. I don't know much about that.
Well, I mean, I guess that the most interesting one for people to hear about is this guy Richard Prince, who maybe people know. He got famous in the 80s for reappropriating the Marlboro Cowboys, and he would just take pictures of those billboards and sell them as his art.
Okay.
But he's done other things, like where he's taken The Catcher in the Rye and he's reprinted it exactly as it is, but then just signed his name at the end of it and sold it outside of the Met, like in front of the Met, like as his own.
Right.
And then one of the more famous ones that he did back in the day was, I don't know if you remember this picture of Brooke Shields, who was a big actress back in the 90s or whatever, and she started as a child star, and at some point for a fashion magazine, her parents somehow allowed her to be photographed when she was like 13, like nude in this bathroom with like this weird fixture, and because it was in this fashion magazine, like no one really said too much about it. So
Right.
Richard Prince appropriated that work. He put it in a Bowery space, like back in the 80s when it was like a hellhole down there, where you had to walk through this dark, desolate room in order to get to this weird picture of her. And it changed the context of once he appropriated. It didn't change the picture at all, but just by putting it into a different environment, it was like, this is some creepy shit. Like, why is this even allowed, sort
So
of
just
thing?
kind of hung the picture.
Yeah, hung the picture in that space. But because you had to walk by all the people on drugs and through this creepy old building or whatever, it made you view it in a different way than flipping through a glossy fashion magazine or something like that. So he has this idea, this appropriation ideas. Once you appropriate it and change the context, then it's a different thing. And he keeps playing with that. So his most recent stuff is he will comment on somebody's Instagram picture. So it'll be someone famous like Kendall Jenner or something like that. And he'll just comment like kiss, kiss, heart, heart, Richard Prince or something like that under it, make a big blow up of it, and then sell it at an art fair like for $100,000 or something like that.
I think that's pretty genius.
Yeah, it is.
Because what you're doing is playing with the context of capitalism and consumption and I don't know, identity, really.
Yeah.
And if anyone can, that's what hip hop is always about. This comes out a lot on the podcast, is like this idea of circumlocution. You speak around and you reference something. So like by scratching, you're taking the words spun around and scratching to say something new, and you're giving it a new context. And
yeah.
the medium is the message, like that, like that famous quote that becomes something different. And so if you can get people excited about it, it's not so interesting what you did technically. It's how you create this content within the society that consumes ideas.
Yes.
But
yeah,
I could see how someone who, like, let's say if someone were to Instagram your Marge Simpson and he wrote kiss kiss and he made $100,000 off print of your print, if I were you, I would be upset.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. And I mean, I think that's kind of the thing. And you see it in politics or whatever as well too, is like, you're not allowed to punch down. You're only allowed to punch up for the most part.
That's a good point.
So like if Richard Prince made $100,000 off of me, like people would be pissed off. Probably they would be like, you can't take a young artist's work who's not making his own money and do that. But if he's making it off of like Kendall Jenner or something like that, like no one cares.
That's a good distinction.
Yeah. So I think that's part of it as well too. And it's funny because there's that part of it is when the idea changes. You appropriate something and the idea changes. But then there's other artists that will play with other copyright laws that are like, there's this guy Tom Sachs who he figured out that Hello Kitty's copyright on Hello Kitty was like only up to 10 feet. So if you built a Hello Kitty that was, or maybe it was more, 30 feet or something like that. If you built a Hello Kitty that was above 30 feet,
right,
then they no longer had copyright over it.
Interesting.
So he pushed the copyright in that way as well too. And of course, all these things of like appropriating culture goes back to this Warholian idea of taking celebrities and photographing their pictures and putting them out there as well. And I guess I'll note on this podcast, I'll argue for the art world in some way, because I think that in a lot of ways it's snooty and should be made fun of and should be knocked down every chance we get to knock it down because of how snooty it is. But if anything, it is this group of people that are kind of on the forefront of some of these ideas. So if you look back at Warhol or Richard Prince or something like that, Richard Prince is like way beyond, he was doing what's happening in copyright law 20, 30 years ago or something like that. Warhol was way before all this celebrity stuff that was going on in our culture and predicting it. And it allows this like space for people to explore these ideas before that they hit culture a lot of the time. But I mean, that's not just the fine art world, that's any sort of art form, I think, as well. But
so he predicted the peregrinations of culture. That's a phrase we talk about on this podcast. The shifting and moving of culture. So the idea that Elvis can transcend Elvis and become a million prints of him, or Marilyn Monroe becomes, the art becomes the fact that she's replicated a million times. And then that interestingly predicted the internet, right? That you can make a million copies and you don't own your own, you can't own yourself once you're like a celebrity. Way, everyone owns you.
Yeah, it's funny. There's kind of all ways that you can pick apart Warhol. That being a great one, and then the whole line of like everyone is famous for 15 minutes or whatever, which is more and more true with having social media and our little moments out there in society, and also that just celebrity translates to money as well too. That you get enough followers and you get enough attention, that goes straight into money. And Warhol was basically like, oh, Liz Taylor is this famous. All I have to do is print a picture of her, and it translates directly into money.
Yeah,
yeah.
That's true with like YouTube. If you do a reaction video to the right video, that's art that people care about.
Yeah.
They want to know what this person thinks about this.
Yeah, and kind of building off of the attention that's paid to somebody else as well.
So the real commodity, kind of like going back to what we're talking about, is time. Because these canvases take time. Building your brand takes time. Talking on a old colleague's podcast takes time. So it's like, do you ever worry that there won't be enough time to do everything you want?
That's a good question. One that I haven't thought about for a while, but now that you're asking it, I don't have that stress anymore. I think that for a long time I did have that stress, and now I don't care as much. And I kind of thought that like, I should try to make a movie at some point. I should try to take pictures more and all this kind of stuff. And I think I'm letting, at least for the last few years, I've let go of that urgency and just been okay with the slowness of painting, and kind of look to that as a strength of it as well too. So yeah, I don't know if that'll stay the same. Maybe I'll get neurotic and crazy about it again, but for right now it feels okay.
What inspired that shift? That's cool.
I don't know. Maybe just getting older. If I take it from a biological perspective, I think the testosterone is running out of my body a little bit. And testosterone is a hell of a thing for me. Most guys, I guess, or anyone who's taking testosterone at this point, it makes you crazy. I'm a much happier and calmer person now that just that chemical is not in me as much anymore.
Yeah, that's interesting.
But also just coming to terms with like, I've spent so much time in this. I have friends, like you, that make music, and friends that have made television shows, and friends that have made movies, and the amount of practice and time that goes into doing that thing well is like crazy. So I don't have this urge to jump around as much as what I used to. And then I just know paintings take a long time, and I probably make too much of them anyways right now, even though I make maybe 12 a year. Like, we should cut this down sort of thing, even though that's not very financially not very reasonable, but it would be better if I made less paintings, to tell you the truth.
Because why? Because the ones you do make then go up in value?
I just, I have a lot of bad ideas, and I think that, are not, I mean, it's more that it's editing out the bad ideas and knowing when to edit out the bad ideas as well too. And because I want them to be around for a while, and I don't want them to be consumed quickly, I think that I shouldn't put them out so quick. So it's like a special thing once someone gets one, or once I decide one's finished or whatever. But maybe that's snobby of me too. There's also a snobby part of that.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. And I think going back to like one of the things we talked about at the beginning of this interview is that you were saying how, with Sean and people are trying to be musicians and have streaming content, you pay your rent if X amount of people listen to your stuff or watch your movies.
Right, yeah.
As a fine artist, one collector falling in love with your work helps. So you don't have to cast your net as widely.
Yeah.
Which I think I wonder, like, it's a different kind of end goal, but the real thing is about enjoying the process.
Yeah, and totally.
I think what you talked about, like not stressing out, I've had like a similar focus where like my goal is, I used to want to make 1 million YouTube videos and do 1 million comics. And now it's like, if I can do a few comics and do an album a year, that's good. That's enough.
Yeah. That's a lot of stuff.
That's still a lot of content.
Yeah.
And so I'm not worried about it as much. And so on a marketing level, do you put much of your brain into thinking about like, oh, well, this a certain person will be attracted to this array of flowers, or are you more thinking like, this is what I want to do and we'll see what happens?
I think it's kind of impossible to divorce yourself from that completely.
Yeah.
I mean, it's funny. It's an argument that I have with creative people, and have, I had at grad school with a lot of people as well too, is like whether you should be the kind of maker that isolates yourself in a cave and just makes work suiting your own interests or whatever, or whether you should think about the audience and how it's going to relate to people. So for me, I know that if I ever try to make something that I think will just sell or people will like, that it usually turns out pretty bad, to tell you the truth, when I look back on it, or I'm a little embarrassed about it. It has to be personal in some way.
That's great.
Yeah. How do you feel about that?
I relate to it. And I think if I've tried to talk about something topical, like I did a Game of Thrones song, which was the lead single on like 2 albums ago. Mm-hmm. And I like Game of Thrones, but because it was so popular. Yeah. But I probably shouldn't have made that the lead single, because there was so much Game of Thrones content in 2015. Mm-hmm. And I realized it was because I was trying to chase that, what I thought was popular. Yeah. And it didn't ring as authentically as something about like my life. Yeah. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah.
And so it's a constant battle, and it's something I think good artists have to like shut off temporarily.
Yeah.
Like
I think so too.
Yeah.
It's a difficult thing to navigate, because I have a very similar, I think that there's trends that happen within the art world as well too. And you can see by what the galleries are showing, what kind of art, what the trend is. And I think that, when artists see that there's a trend out there, for a while it was abstract works. So people were making much more abstract sort of artwork, and then it became figurative and cartoony. So people made that more often. And I see myself, falling into that. So, but part of it is just like, that's also what people are talking about in society, and you're part of the conversation, and you want to make artwork of your time and when you're living. So you want to be a part of that conversation as well too. So it's tricky to navigate, right?
Right. And especially in a city like New York, where popular culture is, you get on the subway, you see the billboards, you listen to someone's on the phone, they're playing some like a new single, know? Mm-hmm. And so the trick is then the best artists kind of best, I say that in quotes, that end up like canonized, are the ones that accidentally stumble upon what becomes like a part of the zeitgeist, like Kurt Cobain or something. Mm-hmm, but it's maybe a little tragic sometimes, or accidental.
Yeah. And this was actually a question I had for you, was in the music industry, how you've seen it shift, because in the art world, of course, like you look back to some of the like great American painters that have been triumphed to this point, like Jackson Pollock and all those abstract.
Hopper? Is he celebrated?
Hopper's celebrated as well too. But
I know a few. So
I'm talking about more this kind of like 60s canon of artist or whatever. Yeah. But more the point of bringing this up is that at that point, when all those artists were together in New York City, there was no internet, there was no press for them, no one cared about them at all. It was just a group of artists that were friends, that created their own scene, created their own grouping of ideas. No one knew about their artwork, and now it sells for millions and millions of dollars, but they kind of were able to develop it in this cocoon for a while just among themselves. And ideally, I think that that's how it works, in this more organic way, where it's just a bunch of people with shared interests coming together, making things. And then, like you were referencing with Nirvana or whatever, then like out of those group of people, like maybe one of them becomes really popular and falls into the zeitgeist of society. But now it seems like in the art world, like the communities, because of the internet, don't exist in real life anymore. And they certainly don't exist in a place where the work develops over 10 years and then we see it in culture. Like it just gets picked up on right away, sort of thing. And I'm sure, I know that happens in the music industry at this point as well.
I think it used to be if you worked for A&R or worked in the label side of things, a band would try to sound like whatever was on the radio. Mm-hmm. So that means whatever is new is already a few years dated. It was all about following trends to try to like get enough money to pay for the creation of an album and pay for the promotion, because you had to please those people at MTV who were the gatekeepers.
Right.
And then there was this sudden shift where if something was weird, I think Odd Future were on the forefront of this. Something was weird and aesthetically unique and unified and collectives, that then became, they were doing their own thing without the corporate structure, but then that stuff got invested in.
Yes.
And that is, I think now it's just like, if you get on the right playlist with music, you're good. But
interesting.
It's wild, man. I think if you're unique enough and you're doing it for real, that's what I try to tell young artists. And I know a lot of like young content creators listen to this podcast. So my advice is always just like, be fearless and be original. And, if you can figure out how to pay the rent and pay for food, you're good.
Yeah.
That's all you need.
Well, that's a total feat at this point, right?
Yeah.
If you can get to that point.
That's what everyone's striving for.
Yeah. I mean, that's like an unattainable goal for me. If I can just make paintings and like live my life, like that would be amazing.
But, can we talk about your latest show, Hell for Rainbows?
Yes, I called it a Hell for Rainbows is what I called that one.
What inspired that title?
Well, I guess that the last show also had rainbows in it, and it was called A Spectrum in Retrospect. And I guess that this part of the idea behind that was this, like, the way that we take in a bunch of jumbled information and how it feels cohesive once you look back at it. But in the moment, it's kind of all over the place and frantic. So it was like a very kind of positive show for me. I was like in a good headspace, and it was just like a positive message almost when I looked at that show. Of course, no one else would look at that show and think this, but that's what I was thinking. So the next one I wanted to be a little bit darker, and I made these rainbow paintings, and one with this like fiery red background, and I was like, oh, look, I made a little hell for this rainbow to live in. And then I just thought it was a good conceit, like a hell for rainbows. What exactly would be a hell for a rainbow?
Yeah.
And making a painting of it, because a rainbow is an ephemeral thing, it's there and then it's gone. So making it permanent would be maybe hellish for the rainbow. And then I was painting these rainbows that were the little plastic birthday balloon rainbows as well too. So it's like, not only is it a rainbow that's there forever, but it's this like plastic rainbow that's like destroying the environment at the same time.
Right.
And then I was also forcing them into one spectrum as well too. So that rainbow was existing in this kind of all red atmosphere. So it didn't go through the full spectrum of colors. It was forced into just one color, palette or whatever.
That's cool.
So that was the why the name was there.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So it's conceptual that also applied to like your understanding of the technique of color and science, and that's cool. That's very unique.
I mean, it's funny because there's these two things that I've talked about my artwork, which is the only thing that you should ever listen to me about, which is like it's post-internet, and then it's about the disparate information and how we connect it, and then I have all these other nonsense ideas that underlie everything else, and I love talking about them, and I love going on about them, but it never really adds up. And like one way I think of this is like I went to grad school. Grad school is ridiculous for artists. I don't know if you know this. It's not like there's no painters there. There was no one teaching me how to paint. It was all theory all the time.
Right.
So we were like taking classes on like Hegel or something like that. We were reading like Phenomenology of the Spirit, like these very, very heady philosophers. And like, you're supposed to apply this to your art in some way. I don't really know. But you come out of that situation and you're like, oh, I want to be a smart person. Like, I'm going to explain my art through all this theory, basically.
Right.
And I had these like studio visits with people where they'd come over and I'd be like, don't you see Marge Simpson's connects to the flowers, which connects to the bust, which connected. And they're just like, I feel like I'm a mad conspiracy theory person that's like has yarn strings connecting things. Like I'm a serial killer in here, like totally in his own world or whatever. Right. But in my mind, I was like, no, all the ideas make sense. And all these theories that I'm applying to it and these smart people, because I'm a smart person or whatever. And then I would turn the lights off after that studio visit. And there was this moment where there was this like warm light coming in from outside and this cool light from inside. And there's on the buildings in the financial district, there's these reliefs of busts, and I paint busts as well.
Okay.
And then I looked at one of my paintings, and one of my paintings has this warm light coming from one side and this cool light coming from the other side, and it's of a bust. And I've just gone through this whole thing of like, this is why I make this artwork, is because of this very intellectual pursuit or whatever.
Right.
And it's like, no, it was just the thing that was outside your window and you didn't realize it this whole time. And it just
it was like so subconsciously influencing you.
Yeah, it was just there.
That's awesome.
And I mean, and it's just like, you have some control over these things, and you know, but it feels like you don't really a lot of the time. I don't know if you feel that way in your creative process, that there's all these ideas, but when you look back at it, you're just like, oh, like this is just kind of a manifestation of my life and my experiences through whatever I was interested in at the time, instead of like an idea.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. I think that my songwriting, you know, talking about, like we talked earlier about your audience, right? Mm-hmm. I have this dichotomy now where my stuff is either really personal about like what it's like to be a dude in his 30s, mm-hmm. or I love doing the literary rap because that's timeless in a way that's like, so I used to want to do more pop culture parody stuff. I still do that a little bit, but I try to, you know, it's like, it's hard to approximate like your influences in a way that feels genuine. So now going back, I just try to like talk about stuff that I'm thinking about, or like boring stuff that if it sounds good, it's cool. Yeah. You know, like this is like potentially, I don't know. Hip hop is so young and so energetic and so anarchic. And so it's like, I often ask myself, where do I fit in all that? And I'm like, oh, well, I fit in because I love the energy of the music. Yeah. But anyway.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's funny because it's like, I guess another way of looking at it, and it's a conversation that I have with our friend Sean as well too, and something that he points out is that it's mostly just the time and energy that you put into something. Like a lot of the time, if he's developing a television show, you're like, oh, Sean, what's it about? And that's what everyone concentrates about. And whether it's about a guy that's friends with aliens or a person that, you know, lives in Santa Cruz with their parents or something like that, it's not really about that idea. It's more how you develop that idea and the time that you put into it. So I guess that kind of marries with what I was talking about a little bit, that there's like the idea, but then there's just how you make things. And if you spend time on something, it's like, it's the time put into it. But I'm again saying this as a painter who spends hours and hours on one object and not in the field that you guys are in.
But it's similar too, because it's trusting in the process. And you know, have you ever seen the Robert Crumb movie that David Lynch produced?
Yes.
Crumb. You know, at the beginning he's drawing and they say, Robert, what's your work about? And he goes, Jesus, I don't know. I draw, I have to have the courage, and I ask myself, what's coming out of this? Sometimes I don't know. And that's what I guess has gotten him into some trouble with his, with how the comic culture wants to cancel him.
I could see that. I didn't know about this, but that makes sense.
This whole movement, especially people who, I don't know. Anyway, but
he's funny because he's crossed over into the art world. You know, he shows at the second biggest gallery in the world. It's called David Zwarner Gallery, and they sell his original drawings for lots and lots of money, and people love him, and he gets reviewed by the New York Times and all the snooty places, you know, so
because he's counterculture. And now it's counterculture because the culture is the cancel culture. So that's crazy.
Maybe true. Yeah. And I mean, but it's an interesting thing that you bring up. And I guess that part of my argument for the art world again, or what makes it unique, is that I think we do have a little bit more space to be not as safe with our ideas, because they don't have to function within the market in the same way that someone who's making content for a larger audience does. So they're allowed to be a little bit messier and crazier, and we're allowed to be a little bit more like mad scientists in here, and push borders in a way that because we make a thing, and it doesn't have to sell to a bunch of people. It just has to sell to a few people.
It's like, I don't know if you knew about, well, you probably know about this. The Wu-Tang did that one record and they sold one for $1 million.
Yeah.
And then Martin Shkreli bought it.
Yeah.
And so, but it's like, that's pretty smart. That's the model you're talking about. It totally fell on the art world model right there. And it's funny, it's funny to see like hip hop come into the art world over the years, because like Jay-Z did his whole thing where he rapped in the gallery and all that. And of course Kanye buys a lot of artwork and talks about it or whatever, because it's like, it's this like, once you're a rich person, like
like, it's not about what cars you have. Like, forget like $100,000 Bugatti or whatever it is, you know. Do you have like the 20 million Jeff Koons sort of thing?
Do you have a Chason Matthams hanging in your living room?
That would just be embarrassing. That would be like finding out the rapper has like a fake chain or something like that.
No, but you're right. It's status. There's that great Calvin and Hobbes cartoon. You probably know the one I'm referring to, where he's talking about, oh, look, a painting of a comic strip, high art, a drawing, and then it's like, oh, look, a drawing of the painting, low art. Yes. Oh, look, a painting of the drawing of the painting, high art.
Yes.
And it's a distinction of, I think about this in hip hop. It's very interesting talking about the cultural history of it. Mm-hmm. That distinction of what is, high art versus low art. And is it what you sample? Mm-hmm. Is it the race of the people who make it, the people who buy it? Is it the class? Yeah. And that's, oh man, some murky stuff.
It is totally murky. And I mean, within the art world, and there is a giant hierarchy here, and it tries to present itself as the snootiest of all snooty things, because it has to, in order to sell $20 million, $30 million, $100 million, whatever, at this point. It needs to be that snooty. So there is this insane hierarchy in the place, and it's disgusting and gross, and cancels out a lot of people and raises up, old ideas and shuts out new ones and all this stuff. It's bad. But now let me argue for it a little bit as well too. I think that it's funny, in order to make it in the contemporary art world, you kind of have to have like a few different factors in play. And they can be of varying degrees. Like, you could just be like a cool, popular person. Like, you're a cool, popular person. You hang out with the rich people. You hang out with the celebrities. Like, people will buy your art if you're just popular. You're popular, super popular on Instagram, whatever.
You're just like a smiley face on a canvas.
People get away with it.
Sure, right.
People definitely get away with it. But that's one part of it. But then it has to sell as well too. It can't. Someone has to buy it at some point. But then there's this other kind of like intellectual part of it. Like, it has to be reviewed well. It has to, the smart people have to write about it. It has to end up in the right magazines, and then it has to end up in the right museums as well too. Like, if a museum if you're a mid-career artist and like the Whitney buys one of your paintings, like, you can raise the prices of your painting because all of a sudden this institution has bought one of your paintings. So all these three things have to be in place. But to get to my point of why maybe the snootiness is a good thing, is that it gets rid of like the smiley face ones, even though there are some smiley faces in the museum or whatever. It gets rid of kind of the nonsense ones. And there is this thing where it's like, this is an important object. Culturally, it's important. This object that we're putting into a fancy museum with big doors and guards in front of it represents an important shift in culture. And that can be a stylistic shift, but it can also represent a shift in ideas in the culture as well too. So it's like an important artifact to keep around that embodies all these things. And you kind of need like a system and a museum to like protect those things.
It's like the literary canon.
Yeah.
In a way.
Yeah, exactly.
So what are the three things it had? So you're saying, so let me see if I remember this right. You have to be popular person.
That could be one way in.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So either you're a popular person, the second
if they just sell.
If they sell, and then the idea has to be unique.
Yeah, it has to be basically smart people have to like it. It has to be it has to be relevant within culture in some way.
So this brings me to, I have two more questions for you, and I appreciate your time. Do you think it's ever too late for someone to want to be an artist and want to get an MFA, or do you think that, you know what I mean, or do you think that really you have to be a young kid or a young person to become part of the canonized artist? Or do you think it's ever too late to do it,
No, I do not think so. I think that, I went to in the MFA program, we had plenty, I think we had 40-year-old, 50-year-old, maybe even higher at some point that they accept in. Yeah, they try to accept older people every once in a while too. But a lot of the time people will just shift careers as well too and decide to be an artist. And it's this thing, like I'm saying, you don't need an audience. And because it doesn't rely on that big audience and selling it, which is, most of the time people make money off of youthful things and that youthful sort of energy,
right.
In order to do it. But with art, you don't really need to do that quite as much. It helps to be cool and hip and young and all that sort of stuff.
Right.
But there's a lot of examples of people shifting careers and becoming artists later on.
Wow.
But that being said, like I said, it's harder to be an artist, make a living being an artist, than being an actor. And we know how hard it is to be a famous actor or actress. So it's like, it's not an easy thing to do. You're very positive when it comes to this. When my students are like, I love making paintings. Like I want to transfer into the art program. I'm like, no, do not do that. Whatever you do not. Like if you want to be an artist out there, a fine artist, don't do it. It's a terrible world. Don't get into it. It's defeat. But if you have to, if there's no other option for you, then you should. What else are you going to do with your life? Like, do it.
Yeah, and that's interesting, Chason, because a lot of the kids I went to college with, well, I have one friend who's a peer who ended up going into music professionally and doing well, but everyone else would play the coffee house, and then this one dude was a DJ. He started Instagram. You know what I mean? Or like I have a friend who created Patreon. Like they all went into things tangential to art, but that then helped feed their passion and their technique. Yeah, which was cool. And so it's like this interesting question of like the last thing I want to talk about on this interview is how do you then have the discipline to build your technique without the aid of having had like $1 billion app or something that like like some of your students might be doing on the side, right? What is your process how do you make sure you put enough time, and how do you stay disciplined in this pursuit?
It's very difficult, and for me, it's just I think I'm a very routine-oriented person, and that helps me a lot, especially and it's probably why I make the kind of artwork that I make. That's very time-consuming and takes days and days and days and months to make one painting. Sometimes that sort of like wanting that routine in your life, but I've had to set up many different sort of like treats along the path to get me into that sort of disciplined mode of doing it. Okay. And I know that early on, especially after school, even just knowing that a friend is going to stop by for a studio visit or something like that, and knowing I've told this person they're going to show up here. It's embarrassing if I don't have something to show them at this point. So it's going to make me produce something that way. Right. So that's really helpful, is getting other people that you're in conversation with. I think that it's
like a community.
Yeah, a community is helpful, especially in an isolated pursuit like being in your studio as well too. I think having studio visits like this is really nice. I'm calling this a studio visit. This is a podcast for you. Yeah. But it's very similar that you told me that you really enjoy these conversations because it puts you down with someone for an hour or whatever it is. And I think that artists have this same thing where there's this structure here where I just go to some random person's studio I don't really know, and we sit there and talk about ideas for an hour or two or whatever. And that's just really energizing as well too. Yeah. But I don't think I answered your question, did I, about discipline?
It's about accountability. So you're accountable to a community, which helps you create. Sometimes when I'm working on a song, or I do 2 songs a month on Patreon, and those are often, I'll just be like, all right, so it's the end of the month and I have my 2 songs I need to put out, I'm still working on them. But I sit down and I set my stopwatch and I just write and listen to the beat, and I have to do that. Otherwise it doesn't get done. Yeah. So do you set a stopwatch, or do you just come in here and be like, okay, I'm not leaving till I finish this portion of this canvas? Or
I mean, it's difficult. I mean, I have a little bit of a timeline of when I want to finish paintings by, but I think I'm just kind of a guilty person. So I feel guilty a lot of the time if I'm not doing it. And part of it's like, oh, I'm paying for this studio. I went to grad school. You need to get down there and do it. But I mean, I think I'm lucky. I have a genuine love of the process. I love being down here. I get so much meaning out of it, and I'm also feel like an addict most of my life. I want to be in a state of flow at all times, and I'm chasing that on a daily level. And when I say that I'm a routine, disciplined person, it's like I wake up, I want to go for a run, and I want to get that runner's high sort of thing. I want to be in that flow state with running. I'll do that, and now I'll come home and I'll want to meditate for a little while and get everything out and sit there for a little bit. And then I'll get down here and paint for a little while. And I'm chasing this kind of like being within a flow state situation. Yeah. So a lot of you ask about like the discipline thing or whatever, and it's basically like I've just made myself into an addict at this point. Like I just love it. It gives me meaning, and I love doing it. And I turn into a nasty person when I don't have it as well too. I get like, it's like when people get hangry or whatever. Right. It's like if I haven't painted for a while, like even if I'm on vacation,
you get heartgry.
Yeah. Exactly. I'm just like, I haven't been in that flow state. I'm going to bite your head off if like we keep hanging out and I don't get that. So yeah, I think that maybe I'm lucky that way. I don't know.
But it's also a monkey on your back.
Yeah.
You need to do it.
Yeah. I also like whipping myself a little bit too. So it's the same thing. I'm like, I want to get out there and run and feel that pain and then have it transition into pleasure a little bit as well too.
Hey, that's good.
I'm not religious in any way, but a lot of the time I feel just like a good Protestant boy sort of thing. Do you, I mean, for yourself, are you, I mean, I must assume that when you're performing and stuff, you kind of fall into like a flow state sort of situation as well. You know,
touring is exhausting because it's so much time in the van or at the airport.
Yeah.
And I often think about how much easier my life would be if I just decided to go into investment banking or got an MBA and just did marketing for Spotify or, you know what I mean? Something tangential. Right. Yeah. But I couldn't sacrifice my time like that. But it would be easier. Sometimes I wish that I didn't have this, like you're talking about, this needing to flagellate myself constantly, because it would make things easier. Yeah. I'd have money and I'd have a house maybe. And like, but I think the key for me was finding when I met my wife was like, she got it and she doesn't need me to change. And yes, there are certain certain things that come with being in a committed relationship that I have to be conscious of, but that was a big shift. I always felt like the women I dated through my life often, I don't know, I was like, I can't do this forever.
Yeah. Oh, that's a beautiful thing to find. Congratulations.
Like a rare thing. Thank you.
Yeah.
Let me ask, do you have time to like date people and stuff? And we don't have to talk about if it's personal.
Yes, I do have time to date people. Yeah.
And you make sure they understand.
Yeah. I mean, it's run into problems over the years because, I definitely have chosen to come down and paint instead of go hang out with their friends or whatever else needs to go on in order to maintain a relationship at some point. Right. So, they'll find out pretty quickly that it's like, I will only shift my routine so far. Yeah. But I have to say that within a relationship, hopefully I'm better at these things now. Hopefully I recognize this about myself. Yeah. And that comes up a little bit less. I mean, I think at this point, especially if someone's working all the time, my schedule is much more loosey-goosey. Sure. So like, and especially in New York, people are busy all the time. So it's more like I'm more of a perfect boyfriend at this point because I can fit into anyone's schedule, like whatever it is. Like you work all night, like I'll be up during the daytime. You work all day, I'll be up during the nighttime. Like I'll meet you any day of the week to do this thing. So now I'm maybe a little bit better. But in terms of financial stability or anything like that, it's like, sure, I get traded out for the finance guy.
Well, the finance guys don't have these Hegelian explanations for these surreal Marge Simpson paintings. They might.
Yeah, maybe that's a little bit of my edge on this. I don't know.
So you have, what's your website? It's ChasonMatthams.com?
Yeah, ChasonMatthams.com. Cool. And then my Instagram is my name as well, Chason Matthams. And that's where, I announce most things through Instagram at this point. For artists, Instagram reigns supreme at this point. Yeah. It's like where everything happens.
Do you know, how do artists get verified on Instagram? Are you verified?
I'm not verified on Instagram.
Me neither.
I've never tried it. Yeah.
Do you know, I guess, is Banksy? He's probably like
I'm sure he must be verified, right?
It's like it's like the approximation of being in the Whitney. Right? Yeah. You have to have had something. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm trying to think now of the artists that I follow, and I guess some of them do have that little blue check mark, right? Is that what's going on? Yeah, the blue check mark by their name. So they've been verified at some point. But I think once you get to be a big enough artist, then you're like friends with the celebrities. Maybe they tell you how to do it.
Or maybe someone Instagram buys one of your paintings, and that's in your contract.
Yeah. Then you know you can rise up. I mean, I can't stress the importance of Instagram for the art world. I mean, some people don't use it, but I always joke that Instagram did more for me than art school did, or going to get my MFA or anything like that.
You're very active and popular on Instagram.
Well, I rarely ever post it at this point. I don't really have that many followers or anything. But it's you don't need that many followers. Once again, it's just like having the right followers. Is important. But I mean, in terms of what Instagram did was it made it like, it actually started my career of showing paintings. I can't call it a career. The 2 or 3 shows that I've had or whatever came from Instagram. They didn't come from a connection that I'd made at grad school or in my 19 years of work or living in New York or whatever.
You got like DM'd by galleries or something?
It was totally random. It was more that this like guy at Soho Art that used to just chat me up down there, and I would just be like, who is this guy? He's like kind of hitting on me. Like, I don't know about this whole thing. But then it turned out he was really knowledgeable about materials. And then this random person one day was like, hey, remember me? Like, I have this opportunity to do this show in Berlin with this collector. And I was like, bullshit, this person's crazy. There's no way that this is going to happen, sort of thing. But he did. He knew this collector in Berlin, and he brought me out there and put me in this show. And then like that collector Instagrammed one of my artworks. And then another collector was there and Instagrammed my artwork. And then the gallery people take notice because they're like, this person is making some money off of their artwork and we want a cut of it. So, and he doesn't have a gallery. So let's like get in on that whole situation.
The tastemakers.
Yes.
So this might be a weird question, Chason. Mm-hmm. So being like a handsome young man in New York in the art scene, do you feel like that is how young actresses feel in LA? Do you feel like you get hit on and like sexualized a little bit, or can you use that to your advantage, or do you not think about it?
Oh, I love this question.
I don't know if anyone ever asked you that.
I mean, there's the gay mafia within the art world, and they are ever present. And I am friends with a lot of gay guys in the art world, but I do not feel like an actress, because at no point do I feel like I've never been scared or in a situation that I think is too creepy or anything like that.
Okay.
But if we talk about privilege, we grew up in California, went to a private school, white male, whatever. All of that doesn't compare at all to being slightly attractive. People are so much nicer to you if you are, and I'm not that attractive. I'm okay. Like I'm like a 7 maybe or something like that. Let's not get carried away here. But that still is like a pretty big advantage when it comes to socializing if you're in a social world. So, no, if anything, I just like it, and I like the attention, and sometimes it's a little bit creepy, and sometimes you set up boundaries. But
do guys ever think you? I don't know your sexuality. Are you?
I'm straight.
You're straight. Okay, so do guys ever? I don't know. How do you? Because if you're an artist. Mm-hmm. This might, don't mean to sound stereotypical, but there are a lot of great gay artists. Mm-hmm. So how do they know if they ask you, they trying to have a cue? I don't know.
Well, here's where it gets tricky. Yeah. When I can play it to my advantage, I'll be gay for as long as it works in my advantage. Right. That's not true. I'll pretend that I'm gay as long as it's in my advantage. Also not true, but maybe a little bit sort of.
You don't say no.
Like, yeah. I mean, you know how it is. It's like anyone that you're, it's all creepy once you start getting into sexuality and stuff. But even if someone sets up a boundary with you, there's always that little thing in their head where like, maybe no, maybe I know he says he's straight, but maybe not. He seems to be really nice to me, and I'm like open and nice and smiley and want to talk and everything.
Yeah, and I have connections. Or no, the guy's thinking I have connections.
Yeah.
And so it's like this. So it's a question of the power dynamic. I wonder if it's weird. You're a very friendly person, and I know you would never like manipulate someone.
No, I wouldn't, and I wouldn't know how to tell you the truth either. I've never been able to play the game that I've seen other people play within the social game, within the art world, that some people play very, very well. And I've seen them have a lot of success from doing it. And I am terrible at that game. Like, you take me, like when I went to that
networking game,
the networking game. Yeah. Like when when I was talking about this, like guy taking me to Berlin or I'm sorry, to, Brussels is what I meant, to Brussels, to this art fair or whatever. Like they're going to all the fancy art dinners and meeting all these important people and everything. Yeah. And I'm just like sitting at the place that I've been assigned at the table, and they're like coming over and being like, why aren't you networking? You should be up. You should talk to that person and that person. And meanwhile, I've been having one conversation for an hour and a half and being like, we have to leave to get to the next party. And I'm like, bye, Susan. I'll see you later. I hope your son-in-law does okay with his cancer treatments. And I'll try to get in contact with your whatever, in New York. And I'm just like, I don't know how to do that whole social thing. It just, I don't have the bandwidth for it or something like that.
I feel you, man. I think that's music too. A lot of successful musicians are very good at networking and being political, and it's never been interesting to me. Yeah. And I always want, like, I've always, been lucky to have people who can help me book shows, or like I have a really great manager, but my first manager was gay, and there was a little bit of, I don't know. It was interesting because it's like young college dudes in the music industry. There was this like feeling like it's like a fashion show a little bit, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And
totally.
I love my first manager. He's a great friend, but that was always like, I don't know. It's you don't want to be too political, and I never wanted to like I don't know, play something to my advantage, but you're selling yourself at the end of the day. Yeah. And people expect you to, like, Warhol was so good at politicking, wasn't he?
Yes.
That was one of his superpowers.
Yeah. Totally. I understand what you're saying as well too, because you want to have the charisma and you want to have the appeal, but you don't want to put out the wrong message either a lot of the time as well. Yeah. I mean, for the most part, it's just comical, to tell you the truth. And there's a time that I like kind of bow out from those situations. It'll be like me and like 12 gay guys, and they'll just be like, we're going to this thing where they like close you in a room until 5 a.m. And I'm like, okay, like I'll let you guys do that. I'm going to go back to the hotel room at this point. So
have fun.
You have to know when to kind of bow out of those situations as well too. But yeah, it's mostly comical. It's funny. I was on a date recently, and we went to the art book fair, and I was there, and I passed one of a good friend that's a painter, and he came up and he gave me and we had just started dating, and we were just kind of having this conversation of like, well, are you seeing anyone else? That sort of whole thing. Like, what is this between us sort of situation? We had this conversation. We walked into this thing, and this guy comes up and he's like, hi, love, and he gives me a big old kiss sort of thing. And she was like,
on the lips?
No, I mean, it was kind of close because we were in passing sort of thing from her angle. I don't know exactly what she saw or whatever.
And it was a dude. Yeah.
And it was a dude. And she was just like, I thought it was funny, but she looked at me and I was like, oh, she actually doesn't know me that well. And this is like,
maybe you're bisexual.
Yeah. This is like a thing for her. She's like, wait, what is he bisexual? Has he seen that man?
Yeah.
Like, do they have what is going on there?
You're like, I'm an artist. It happens.
No, it's just like it's a very affectionate group of people around sometimes. Yeah. So it's, mostly comical things like that.
Well, it's interesting talking about Alex Wang. He was proud to be himself. And I really, it's so interesting to think of how we went to high school at a time that was literally almost like a century ago. Yeah. And how, a lot of your art is about breaking boundaries and trying to synthesize meaning in like these confusing, exciting times. And it's really been a privilege talking to you, Chason.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to have you here.
It's cool, man. And I love your paintings, and I hope that the listeners will check out your work, and I'll tweet next show you got.
Cool.
Next showing. And
I'm into it. Yeah.
Oh, we should end with a song.
Okay.
Do you have any recommendations?
Oh, the 9 Inch Nails, Mr. Self-Destruct.
Let's find like a cool cover of it. And we'll end with that's perfect.
Oh, that would be so perfect. Please.
We'll find like a sensitive, relaxed. In the preview to the podcast, I'll say what we're gonna play. But okay, so here's a surprising cover of Mr. Self-Destruct. Cool.
Oh, perfect.
sex that you provide. I am the hate you try to hide. I'll take you where you want to go. I'll give you all you need to know. I'll track you down, I'll use you up. It's not self-destruct. I speak religion's message clear. I am denial, guilt and fear. I am the prayers of the naive. I am the lie that you believe. I'll take you where you want to go. I'll give you all you need to know. I'll track you down, I'll use you up. It's not self-destruct. You let me do this to you. 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 I am an exit. You let me do this to you. I am an exit. You let me do this to you. I am an exit. You let me do this to you. I am an exit. I am the needle in your vein. I am the high you can't sustain. I am the pusher, I'm a whore. I am needing you for more. I am the bullet and the gun. I am the truth from which you run. I am the silencing machine. I am the end of all your dreams. I'll take you where you want to go. I'll give you all you need to know. I'll track you down, I'll use you up. It's not self-destruct. I'll take you where you want to go. I'll give you all you need to know. I'll track you down, I'll use you up. It's not self-destruct.
That was the Goth Acoustic Ensemble covering Mr. Self-Destruct by Nine Inch Nails. Great interview with Chason Matthams. Be sure to follow him on Instagram. Check out his website. And this week for the MC Lars Patreon Larson of the week, we got my dude Walter, a Southern gentleman who's been very supportive of the nerdcore scene for years. Came out and saw us on the Aquabats tour. Great dude. He talks about some of his memories, and he's just a lovely guy. So Walter, you got a free MC Lars shirt. If you want to be on the MC Lars podcast, giving shout outs, telling stories, sign up patreon.com/MC Lars. You get the special phone number, and I'll play your message and send you some free merch. So Walter, thank you. Here is his cool message.
Hey, Lars, this is Walter, in some circles known as Walter the Southern Gentleman. So I discovered you because I had seen a Camaro driving down the road and mentioned Bitchin' Camaro from the Dead Milkmen song. And I'd mentioned that, and my son, who was probably about 11 years old at the time, I said, have I not played that song for you? And he goes, no. So I went to Amazon Music to look that up and play it for him and to maybe stream it. And it was nowhere on there. There was no Dead Milkmen on Amazon Music for the Prime streaming, except for Mr. Raven with our good friends, the Dead Milkmen, providing the music. And so that is how I discovered you. I listened to that track first, and then I was like, oh, that's kind of cool. And we listened to the rest of the album. So I listened to the rest of the album, and that was cool. And then I saw that you had an immense catalog, and I'm like, I need to hear all of this. So yeah, and the first time you rolled around was after that was probably about 4 months later, and I brought my son to the show, and we got to meet you, and he was actually on stage for Mr. Raven. You might remember him as MC Mario Kid, and now he's in a band, which is really cool. Take care. Peace.
Thanks, dude. That was awesome. Thank you for your support and love. Next week, we have Blake J. Harris. He wrote a great book called Console Wars, and he came out with a book recently called The History of the Future about virtual reality and the Oculus. And Console Wars is being developed into both a documentary, full-length documentary, and a TV series with Seth Rogen. And so Blake talks about the writing process, growing up in New York, how he left his job as doing trading and did art full time, became a writer full time, and what it's like now writing scripts for these programs. So Blake is a very humble, cool dude. Many of you may have heard on the mixtape I did with Megaran, we did a song about the Console Wars and we sent it to Blake and he liked it. So he came by and talked about his writing process. It was really cool to meet him. So that is next week. NerdcoreTour.com for the Oakley Dokley dates. It starts Friday and I'll be updating y'all from the road. But this has been a great episode. Thank you for listening. We'll see you next week. Peace.